managers enter the field confidently and help seasoned project managers level up their careers. Melicia believes that knowledge empowers and offers advice and guidance through the intro video app. And also, you can find her post about project management and strategy on LinkedIn. So, Melicia, welcome. Thank you for being our speaker today. And the stage is yours. Last thing before I forget, if you have any question, pop it in the chat, okay? And we'll take your questions at the end of the presentation. So that time, your turn, Melicia. Welcome.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or whatever time it is for you. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to learn about stakeholder engagement. And for this specific session, the intent is to pretty much dive into the aspect of mastering stakeholder engagement, which is critical for project. And we'll start with our agenda. First, we will identify and understand who stakeholders are. That's critical to set up context. It's vital to know who our stakeholders are to help us to tailor our approach to engage them effectively. Next up, I'll dive into developing stakeholder engagement, where the strategies that foster collaboration and support will be pretty much unpacked. This will include me just speaking to 3 effective communication techniques. This will segue into building and maintaining relationships, and also just the steps to overcome common challenges that we pretty much encounter in stakeholder engagement. Then I'll talk about best practices, and these are tried and true methods that can guide us towards successful engagement. We'll also look into measuring and improving our engagement efforts to ensure that we are on the right path. And finally, I'll wrap up the webinar with just some insightful case studies and frameworks that really illustrate these concepts in action. So by the end of our session, I hope you'll feel empowered to really enhance your stakeholder relationships for project success. So before we get into discussing stakeholder engagement, we first need to understand who stakeholders are. By definition, stakeholders are just specific groups of people, each with different desires and needs for the organization. Think of a stakeholder as anyone who has a stake, quote unquote, in your organization, either through interest, influence, or both. Stakeholders range from staff, board members, volunteers, funders, government, customers, and beyond. And this is based on the flavor of the initiative or project that you're working on. So what is stakeholder engagement? Having set up context around who a stakeholder is. Stakeholder engagement is a process that organizations can follow, listen to, collaborate with, or inform. And it's the combination of all 3 with regard to their existing stakeholders. This process really entails just identifying, mapping, prioritizing stakeholders to determine the best tactics for effective communication while using available resources. And it's about just actively communicating, consulting, collaborating with the people who can influence or impact your project, your initiative, or whatever the end result is. As we dive into the key elements of stakeholder engagement, let's start with identification. So first, we know who our stakeholders are. Once you understand that, you need to see whether they're internal or external parties, and understanding how crucial they are to your project. Next, it's around analysis. And here we need to assess their interests, influence, expectations, and concerns. And this will guide how we interact with them effectively. Now, understanding the stakeholder in and of itself is critical because it helps us to build trust and credibility. It reduces resistance and conflicts. It increases project success chances and really improve decision making with diverse perspectives. And lastly, it ensures that there's better alignment with stakeholder needs and expectation. With the analysis completed, then comes planning, and just think about how you will engage them, what methods you will use, how often you communicate with them, what really the style of communication that resonates with them. And finally, we have the monitoring aspect, and it's essential to track the effectiveness of your engagement strategies and just adjust them as necessary. And why this is important is because it ensures that the engagement remains relevant and effective. So remember, effective stakeholder engagement is this continuous process. It's not a one-time task, and it helps us to create those meaningful connections that are important in our initiatives that we're managing or executing in our organizations. So stakeholder engagement is crucial. Like, people make or break your projects or the initiatives or whatever the end result is that you're targeting to get to. And stakeholder engagement is crucial for project and organizational success because, as I had stated before, it fosters that level of trust. It improves the communication, just ensure that all the relevant interests are considered, leading to better decision making and outcome. So displayed on the slide is just underscoring the importance of stakeholder engagement in terms of providing that level of transparency, improving the project outcomes, whatever the end result is that you're targeting, and also increasing stakeholder satisfaction. And that is a key tenet to any project engagement you're on, because you need that increased support and buy-in to get the project from the initiation through to its closure and in a successful way. And when stakeholders feel heard, valued, they're more likely to support whatever initiatives or project there is. And it's through proactive engagement, we can really help to address any concerns, build that level of consensus, and just reduce resistance to change. And this sort of resistance can include both positive and negative resistance, and just fostering the heightened level of partnership and collaboration that is needed to get your projects through to the end. And while I don't have it listed here, engaging stakeholders, especially early on in your initiative, can help to identify potential risks and challenges before they become major problems. And it's very important for us as project managers to have that lens to view all our initiatives from a risk management perspective. And that will enable to improve efficiency, improve quality, and have long-term sustainability. Having set up context around stakeholder engagement, what that really is, the key elements in our stakeholder engagement, and also the underlying importance of engaging stakeholders throughout our initiatives, it's now important to really identifying what it, just unpacking what it means to identify and understand stakeholders. Now, as I had stated before, we really need to have early stakeholder identification, and what that constitutes, it's just having a list of all the relevant parties who have a stake, a vested interest, some influence on your initiatives, just have their roles, the contact information, and how your perception, your view of what level of influence and interest they may have on your project. Next is the idea behind stakeholder analysis techniques, and there are quite a few, but the ones that I do leverage a lot would be just having the stakeholder map, the stakeholder register as well, and this helps to shape up the analysis portion where I'm able to better categorize stakeholders based on the urgency that they'll need to get information, whatever influence or interest they may have on my project. So employing like a power interest matrix to visually represent stakeholder levels of their power, their influence over the project really helps to determine the appropriate engagement strategies as project managers that we need to engage in. What I have listed here are for the popular stakeholder mapping tools, the power interest matrix, the force field analysis, the sociogram, and the tried and proven RACI matrix. I'll just go through these. You may be familiar with them, but if you aren't, the power interest grid, the purpose of that specific stakeholder mapping tool that we use is just to help us to categorize stakeholders based on their power or influence, their interest, or the concern that they may have on our project. So how it works, stakeholders are plotted on the grid with the power on one axis, the interest on the other. And if they have a high power, high interest, you'd want to, these are the stakeholders that would require close management and active engagement. If they have a low power, low interest, you want to keep these stakeholders really satisfied to avoid any potential issues. If it's low power, high interest, you want to keep these stakeholders pretty much informed and involve them on a needs basis or as needed. And then if they have the low power, low interest, just monitor them. These are stakeholders that you just need to really keep informed at a minimum. Then for the force field analysis, this is a tool that we borrowed from another specific school of thought or subject matter, but we can use it to identify the forces that are driving or hindering our projects or change initiatives. And especially if we work in very heavily regulated space, we have to be cognizant of this. And how this sort of tool can be applied in stakeholder engagement is through really analyzing the stakeholders who are likely to support or oppose the project. And then that will help to identify any potential challenges and opportunities. So a specific example, a company might use the force field analysis to just understand the factors that are really going to drive or hinder the end result, or if it's a product launch, and you can help to identify the potential problems and solutions, and which stakeholders might aid in that in a positive or negative regard. Another one that is similar to the network diagram is a sociogram, and we know that we are now in a space where social media is heavily proliferated. It's good to have personas, especially if you're in the product management arena. The leveraging sociogram would help us to focus on the social relationships and connections within the group of stakeholders. So how this particular tool can be leveraged is it helps us to identify influential individuals or groups, which are those execs or VPs. We need to really understand the dynamics within our stakeholder network. So as a project manager, you might use a sociogram to understand the informal communication channels within your team, which can help to identify potential influencers or roadblocks on your project initiatives. Then you also have the RACI matrix. The salience model is also other popular frameworks in engaging stakeholders effectively for project success. And while I don't have it displayed here, if memory serves me correct, you just underscore the power, legitimacy, urgency of your initiative, and you have categories that are created to have definitive stakeholders who are powerful, legitimate, and urgent. They would sit on that category. Then you have the dominant stakeholders, and then the urgent but less powerful stakeholders will be categorized as dependent stakeholders. So we've gone through understanding what stakeholder engagement is, the importance, how to identify and understand stakeholders, the type of tools we can leverage. And now it's important to underscore the aspect around developing a strategy, a stakeholder engagement strategy. So once you know your stakeholders, you'll need to solidify a strategy to really manage them effectively based on their interests, influence, and impact. And you do this by creating that comprehensive communication plan. And on my next slide, I do have a snippet of what a communication plan could embody. However, needless to say, it's really for the eyes of the project manager to really outline how information will be shared with stakeholders, including the communication channels, frequency, and who are responsible parties. And you want to really tailor your engagement approaches by outlining how, when, and with whom engagement efforts should really take place. And you customize these strategies based on the different stakeholder groups that you are interacting with in your initiative. One of the reasons why I'm so passionate about stakeholder engagement is because without people, the processes and tools that we are leveraging on our project initiatives, they will not be successful if we're not encouraging, navigating challenges, and even pretty much working through certain conflicts. And if the stakeholders that you're working with are not feeling heard, feeling seen, they're not involved, this can really set us up for failures on our project initiatives. So I really advocate for stakeholder engagement to ensure that we see our projects through to the end. And as I've stated before, people make or break our project initiative. So you need to understand who are the individuals, who are the parties that are influential on your project initiatives, and also who are the individuals who can really stymie progress on your projects. You want to also, while this is very important, I may have had it as a third point, but it's an important point to set clear expectations and objectives. So you want to define what your engagement goals are based on your stakeholder needs. You have an understanding of who your stakeholders are, what your project requirements are, and this will help to shape up how you inform, consult, and collaborate, and even empower your stakeholders. And that's how you drive value too on your initiatives. One of the things that I like to posit is that I'm not necessarily a project manager, but a project leader. And that's where the empowering your project teams and whatever the span of your stakeholder group is, you want to be able to empower these individuals, collaborate with them, and consult with them as necessary to ensure that whatever initiative the end result is that you're working towards get successfully completed based on how you interact with them, based on how you make them feel on your project as you're going through it. It's not about how you handle your Gantt chart. It's not about just documenting things. It's about the individuals that you're interacting with on your various initiatives. So as I had stated before, this is a sample communications plan. that mirrors something that I typically use. And as I've stated before, this is for your eyes as a project manager. And it is just, for me, I think this is the actual backbone of effective stakeholder engagement. And without it, even the best projects can suffer because people will be left confused, misinformed, which is something that you don't want on your project, because you need transparency builds trust. And as project managers, that is critical in our overarching engagement as we interact with people to get outcomes from our initiatives. And even more so, without a proper communication strategy or plan in place, it can lead to some level of resistance. And as I always say, resistance can be viewed positively or negatively. And that's for another webinar that we could pretty much unpack that. But I know when we hear the word resistance, it connotates a negative view, but resistance can be seen as positive, as it can help to aid better decision making. But good stakeholder engagement is like 80% communication and 20% action. And even good project progress will be perceived as failing if we're communicating poorly. So in order to wrap up this slide, here's why a communication plan is pretty crucial. I'll start off by saying with this in place, it helps you to set clear expectation, telling stakeholders what, when, and how, the information is to be shared with them, and it reduces the misunderstanding and any assumptions. It present this consistent, transparent communication. And it really, once you have your comms plan layout, it gets people included and they feel respected. And stakeholders are more likely to support your project if they're kept in the loop or feel that they're in the loop. And it helps to target the right message to the right audience. So different stakeholders need different information. The execs versus your project team members would need different information because they see the project from different perspectives or lens. One size fits all communication doesn't work when it comes to stakeholder engagement. So your execs and your sponsors, they care about the strategic alignment, the return on investment, risks, and high-level decisions. Therefore, the information that they need should be very brief, outcome focus, and also just status summary, risk report, and KPIs. And the exec don't want that 30-page length document. They are really there to unpack, are we on track? Are there risks I need to care about? And what's the return? Conversely, a project team member would need more clear instructions, what are the task assignments, any dependency, and just regular status updates, weekly or daily, depending on the project management framework that is being leveraged on the initiative. So their focus would be on what is critical now and what is changing and why. And this is where the continuous feedback loops are important. So having a good communication plan really helps to tailor messages so they are relevant and meaningful. And well-timed and well-framed communication really lead to better and quicker decisions, and stakeholders know what to expect of them and when. All right. With that being said, effective communication techniques ties in nicely with the comms plan that you have set up, because it will force you to have your regular updates and your progress report, providing the stakeholders with really timely and relevant information. You'll have your interactive meetings and workshops. If you're navigating a particular issue, it's good to get everyone in the room, make the decision quickly. It could be face-to-face or virtual, and you, depending on what is the point of action, is it just discussing the project in detail, answering questions, gathering feedback, gathering information to help make better informed decision, that could be important. And then leveraging technology, because you need to utilize various communication channels like your emails, your Slack channel, if it's WebEx, any sort of chat technology and video conferencing to reach your stakeholders effectively. Okay. Now, if we think about the framework, pretty much that I'd outlined, where you start with identifying, analyzing, building out whatever your comms plan ought to look like. This helps to shape up and build and maintain your relationships as you're going through your projects. So now we're going to dive into the essential aspects of building and maintaining relationships with your stakeholders. And what I have here are just some strategies that are important to embed them for success. And the saying by Thomas Edison goes, strategy without execution is hallucination. So first, it's really critical to engage your stakeholders early and often. Live on the hill for that, because it means that you're promoting open and honest communication channels. And when stakeholders feel involved from the beginning, it's highly likely that it helps to build trust and it creates that positive environment for your project. Next, we need to pretty much focus or really acknowledge their contributions. So you're on an initiative, recognize the input and the expertise of your stakeholders. Not only will that boost morale, but it also instill that sense of ownership in the project outcomes. And this is key to collaboration. And lastly, let's talk about like how we should anticipate issues, and very briefly, by addressing potential objections early on, we can really mitigate risks and increase the chances of success on our initiative. And it's about being more proactive than reactive in our engagement strategy. So in summary, just to summarize this specific slide, it's just around fostering trust, recognizing contributions, and anticipating any challenges. So we can use that to help us to build stronger relationships that will benefit our projects or whatever end result we're working towards more immensely. Okay. You can do everything right and still encounter challenges. Again, just for emphasis, you can be doing every single thing right, have your plan in place, and still encounter challenges. And some of the challenges that I think are popular or more common, regardless of whatever project that I'm working on, it's dealing with competing priority, just navigating resource constraints, and just managing diverse stakeholder interests. And your strength as a project manager is knowing how to balance these nuances as you navigate your project. So dealing with competing challenge, you want to ensure that the information that you're sharing among your stakeholders, you'll recognize that some may require frequent, more detailed communication than others. And in the previous slides, where I made that distinction between what executives need to hear versus what your normal project team members will need to hear, really validates this sort of challenge and stating how to overcome it. Once you have resource constraints, that's always a challenge, regardless of how you plan everything out to the T. So to overcome this or clear that specific hurdle, it's kind of good to develop efficient communication strategies that reach all your stakeholders while really minimizing the time spent on communication activities. And the only way you can do that, if you spend some time during the planning of your initiatives to understand how you're going to interact with your stakeholders. And then lastly, you'll have diverse interests. You're working with a plethora of individuals with diverse needs, with diverse interests, with varying influence as well. So understanding how to to really tailor stakeholder unique needs and preferences and what their communication approach would be based on what you've assessed and analyzed and put forward would be very helpful. So the best practices, and this is something that I think is value add, especially for this webinar, just to mitigate challenges, it's crucial to leverage proven methods that can lead to superior results. So again, the emphasis on early and continuous engagement. It's a two-way communication streak. You need to, one of the things, if you as a project manager, if you're navigating a particular conflict, active listening need to be leveraged, and documenting and reporting your engagement activities. That's good, because once you're working through a project end to end, you reach the lessons learned. I can assure you that stakeholder needs, the engagement aspect of things will always be documented as a lesson learned because of the nuances, the idiosyncrasies of dealing with people. That's always something that, as project managers, I think at most, we really love what we do in terms of the technical aspect, but it's with the leveraging of the soft skills, dealing with people, that we most time encounter a lot of challenges. And if we go through and do our post-mortem or retrospective, depending on what flavor of project management framework you're leveraging, you'll always see something documented about stakeholder engagement. It is for me, so I don't know what it is like for you as you navigate your projects in that regard. And then the aspect around just avoiding any decay with all the efforts that you've taken to ensure effective stakeholder management. It is essential to ensure the openness to feedback and the intentionality in measuring success. So I feel that, yes, you may do all your planning, you may be executing your initiative, working through all the difficulties or issues that may arise from a stakeholder perspective, but then it's important for you to really measure your engagement success, to be able to see your trajectory and growth in that regard. So you want to ensure that you're doing this sort of measuring to ensure there is continuous improvement, because that is critical on all our initiatives. So what I had displayed here is just, you want to have those indicators that will help you to know that you're effectively engaging your stakeholders, and that can help you to measure success in terms of the stakeholder feedback scores. You'd want to, like, for me, I think that's also a part of your post-mortem. And if you're doing your checklist when you're wrapping up your projects, you want to get feedback from your stakeholders specific to how you interact with them and communicate with them throughout the initiative. Participation rates, response time to communication. What was the turnaround time? Was that effective for you? And you can use these sort of feedback to help you to gauge and be better on your next initiative. And that's underscoring the point around continuous improvement. And then it's, once you get the information, you don't want to do it as a one-time thing. You want to ensure that it's regularly done. You want to ensure that you identify those areas of improvement and act on it, actually do the work to be better. And then just ensuring that you update your comms plan. This is throughout your initiative, of course. And also at the end, you may see, okay, this is something that I had that one-off exec who was actually always asking for information. It may not mean that this is something that you need to have where all my executives will be the same, but you have to know how to pivot quickly when there are certain nuances that you have to address. And that's only possible if you're measuring and actively trying to improve on your stakeholder engagement. And we're coming down nicely, and I'm so looking forward to whatever questions that you guys may have to throw. And these are 3 cases. I summarized 3 case studies from real world scenarios to pretty much underscore how the concepts of aligning stakeholders, overcoming resistance, and building trust, which are core to stakeholder engagement in action. And for transparency, I did not support these initiatives or had any stake in them. However, for emphasis, these are just real world examples, I believe, show clear application to the concepts I unearthed so far in this specific session. So for case study 1, Microsoft shift to cloud computing. When Microsoft transitioned from a traditional software licensing model to a cloud-based subscription model via Office 365 and Azure, they face major organizational shift affecting customers, internal teams, and partners. And their tactic was really around ensuring that they had prioritized clear, consistent communication about the strategic shift. They had town halls, they had customer advisory board, they had partner engagement sessions. You may have had received those emails just to address concerns, and stakeholders were involved early on. And that helped to shape out their cloud roadmap. And the outcome for that was better alignment with internal and external stakeholders, just to help smooth the transition. And that led to growth in their cloud revenues and stronger customer adoption. For the second one, around pretty much overcoming the significant stakeholder resistance, the Heathrow T5 project encountered resistance, multiple stakeholders. This is around the British Airports Authority, their Terminal 5 project. This was big in the news as well. And they had resistance from multiple stakeholder groups, airline, government bodies, local communities. And it was due to the environmental and operational and cost concerns. And the BAA, what they did was to just adopt that integrated team approach involving all the stakeholder groups in the decision making, not just consultation. And this allowed them to have that comprehensive risk sharing module, and collaborative governance structure was created. And the outcome of that excellent case study was that despite the early delays and criticism, the project achieved operational readiness within the airline, and it improved their public perception, making it one of the most complex, successful airport expansions in Europe. And the last case study to pretty much validate building trust and collaboration for project success would be the 2010 Vancouver Olympics, just taking it home where I'm at in Canada. They had to deliver the Winter Olympics that required strong partnership among government, sponsors, indigenous groups, and the local community. And what the Vancouver Winter Olympics organizing committee did, they implemented a stakeholder relations department solely dedicated to ongoing engagement, and Indigenous groups were given a formal role in organizing committee, not just as consultants. Information sharing practices built long-term trust, and the outcome for this was that the games were delivered on time, on budget, with record levels of local community and Indigenous participation, and that led to a lasting partnership beyond the event itself. So let's just bring it all together. This stakeholder engagement framework really is crucial to understand the importance of each step in the process. So first, we identify who our stakeholders are, and this really involves just mapping out who they are, understanding their interests, their power, influence, and this is pretty much foundational for us to tailor our engagement strategies effectively. Then next, we analyze the information that we collect on our stakeholders, and by assessing the stakeholder expectations, we can pinpoint pinpoint potential sources of resistance or support, which is vital for our success. The third step is regarding engaging with our stakeholders, and that is through just developing strategies that are tailored to each group. And it ensures that we meet their unique needs. And finally, we have to pretty much monitor and adopt our strategies. And that's where the continuous assessment comes in, allowing us to really refine our approach and to ensure our commitment remains transparent and effective throughout the process, and also after the engagement or the project initiative that we're working on. We are better able to do effective stakeholder engagement on our next initiatives. So as we move forward, keep these steps in mind. They are not only there to really guide us in our engagement efforts, but it really helps us to build lasting relationships with our stakeholders, which is very critical, regardless of which organization or domain you're in. As I stated before, transparency builds trust, and that's the underlining tenet with stakeholder engagement. And it's a strength for us as project managers. Once we own in on the skill of knowing how to work well with our stakeholders, it will allow us to be successful on our project initiatives. So thank you for taking the time to join, and feel free to connect with me on my platform that I typically use mostly, and it's via LinkedIn. All right, so over to you. I'll take questions now.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Melicia, for this very insightful dive into stakeholder management. I think you covered, wow, so much. So everyone here, if now you say you don't know how to engage your stakeholder, you have no excuse, because you've seen this very thorough webinar and you'll receive the recording of it. So now no excuse for engaging your stakeholders properly in your project. So a lot of thank you in the chat. And so if you have any questions, drop them in the chat. At the moment, I saw one, which is basically following. I know you gave case studies, but someone was also asking whether you could give maybe a slightly more personal, how a challenge that you faced in a project with stakeholder engagement, and how did you overcome the hurdle that you faced?
Sounds like an interview question, and I like
that.
So as I said before, stakeholders make or break our initiative. So one of the things that I do when I start a new initiative, whether or not I know these individuals within my workplace, is to understand what their view is of my project. Is it a priority on their list of things to do or not? And once I unpack that, it helps me to know how to navigate the nuances of dealing with them as a stakeholder. While I can't unpack a specific example because of the organization that I work for, I can say that at most, the issues that I do have on my projects is the interactions that I have with stakeholders. And it's not because they don't want to support my initiative, it's because it's not a priority for them. So the work that I have to do is to ensure that I make it a priority. It's not easy, but it's around how I provide them with updates and just build that value and urgency around my initiative. I think one of the things that as project managers, we fail to understand is that our projects, unless it's an enterprise or a strategic enterprise initiative that has key ties to the underlying return on investment for the organization, you have to do the work to engage your stakeholders. You have to do the work to prove to them that your initiative needs to be prioritized. So to specifically respond to that question, it's around me first understanding what stake they have in my initiative, what their level of interest is, and what their influence is. And that is how, with that, I use that to build my strategic move in knowing how to communicate with them and to prove to them that my initiative is a priority, especially if I have to get a particular input from them, or if the end result of my initiative is an input for them, even if it's not a top priority item on their list.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It's a bit about increasing the interest of the stakeholders that need to be interested for the success of the project, but at the beginning are just not interested. Maybe they haven't understood what there's in the project for them. So it's to find how to increase their level yeah, that's very, very interesting. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, there's another question that just arrived again about an example. Can you share an example of a time when strong stakeholder engagement saved a struggling project?
Yes. So recently I was working on a particular initiative and there was a gap in vendor relationship. And without leveraging the stakeholder that I had, one of the stakeholder who was very influential on my project, this is an exec. So without underscoring the need of stakeholders, we can't survive on our initiative. So I had to leverage that specific exec to help me through tightening a vendor relationship. And without my strategy and stakeholder engagement, I would not have been able to quickly pivot, get this person on board, make quick decisions to help me out, to get a particular piece of equipment that was required for the initiative in on premise. So that's an example of where, because I had intentionally done the stakeholder analysis, had my comms plan, how I could interact with this particular individual with that particular issue that arose, I was able to navigate it because I had done the work to set myself up for success with regards to proper stakeholder engagement.
Yeah, that's a very good, and that's a very good example. And that reminds me of something important that you presented. There are some other questions coming, but just something. It's the sociogram analysis, because it's true that we tend to analyze the stakeholders in relation with the project, but then we forget that a lot of them in daily life, in their daily activities, because of their other responsibilities or their position, their jobs, they interact with each other. And no, like in your example, basically this exec, because whatever relationship that person already had with the vendor, you could bring that person in to help soothe and save the project. So I thought that was a very, very important tool that unfortunately is not used a lot because we don't think about the relationship between stakeholders.
Right. Such an
Yeah,
important.
that's right. So now, oh gosh, that's a very long one. MZ is asking, how would one best deal with a problem where the main contractor has been appointed with low rates, with the project having contract participation goals to involve subcontractor? However, subcontracting is jeopardized because the subcontractor cannot execute any task. Just a second, I'm lost now. Is because the subcontractor cannot execute any task with these low rates and they cannot claim more than the main contractor. How does one keep the local community engaged and help not compromise the project due to this frustration? This kind of
Hmm.
that's
So I'm no expert in procurement management. And I think that question is pulling on information that would require like somebody with strong procurement management. But what I think I got from that particular question is if a person doesn't have a particular influence on the initiative, how given the rates, and I'm just seeing a political nuance there as well. So to answer that best, it's always good to have representatives who have a particular high stake so that it can help to navigate nuances like this. Because if they're not being paid well, and I'm hoping that I'm responding to this question correctly, they may their worth, their interest will wane. And I really think if the person could communicate with me offline on this, I'll try to unpack what the underlying question is so I can really answer it properly. I just don't want to finesse and impose my assumptions on this particular question. So I'll definitely put that in the parking lot. And if the person want to reach out to me for us to unpack it over a coffee chat or something like that, as long as I have capacity to do it, I'll definitely do that.
Thank you. That's very nice of you. So yeah, so please, MZ, if you can connect with Melicia on LinkedIn and then CC with her. Thank you very much. Then the next question, and we've got 2 questions left. The next question is, how transparent should you be with stakeholders when a project hits a roadblock?
I think it's very important, like for me, that's an ethical perspective as a project manager. And as I've stated before, transparency builds trust. And I've had to have difficult conversations with sponsors and execs around not coming in on time or requiring more money for additional equipment because it wasn't factored in. So a case in point, I was working on a particular initiative and the initial plan factored in just costs for several equipment. It so happened as there was progressive elaboration, we got to understand that we would need additional equipment. I had to really take that back to the execs and I had to be transparent. So how transparent you have to be? Very transparent. And as a project manager, it is our ethical position to always be honest, to build credibility and trust on our initiatives.
Thank you very much. Yes, we cannot underestimate the power of transparency, honesty, and yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And then the last question we have for the moment is how to deal with powerful, high power, high interest stakeholder who is negative to your project.
All right. So while I've never had that experience before, I've heard of cases where it's just a switch. I like to phrase it as a switching priority. So that allows it to come off as negative as it ought not to have been. But then, this person heavily vested, can make decision, have the power calls, but it's no longer a priority. So as a result of that, it really forces them to it really forces them to I do apologize for that. It really
That's okay.
Not being able to no longer show that heightened level of interest. And as the epiphany came, you need to understand, where they're at. And having that particular understanding will help you to meet them where they're at and have the conversation to really come to a common consensus around where the project would go if they are not heavily invested as before.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And I think that to wrap up and summarize, that was, I think, a very good point that you made, is that in short, to get a good stakeholder engagement, you need to meet your stakeholders where they are at, and then you move forward together for the success of the project. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
So thank you for all your insights, for this really wonderful presentation. It was really so thorough. I'm sure everybody here has learned so much from that. So thank you, Melicia. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And well, shall we see you in the next IPM webinar next month? Yeah, I'm sure you can make it. Come on. Register, go and register now and book your calendar, and see you next month.
Thank you so much for having me.